Hi, and welcome to Resin Chem Tech. This is part 2 in a multi-part series on building an 80s style coin-operated retro arcade machine. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll leave a link down in the video description and throw something up here in the corner. But part 2 is going to focus on the actual build of the main cabinet itself. So let's get started. So at the end of part 1, I had the design finished. I had obtained most of my parts, including all of the arcade control parts, and was really waiting for the weather to warm up. So once the weather warmed up, it was time to start the actual cabinet construction. Now I opted to build my cabinet out of MDF or medium density fiberboard. You could use plywood, but I opted for MDF because of the ease of working. Again, remember, I'm not an expert woodworker. I don't have a big shop. And just as a reminder, in case you're intimidated, these are the only power tools that I used in building of this cabinet. And I pretty much did everything solo. I did have help for about 20 minutes when I put the two sides together and help again to move the cabinet to the basement. But otherwise, I worked completely alone. So if I could do this, you could do it. Now, the one drawback to MDF is the fact that it's extremely heavy. In fact, one of the biggest challenges I had working by myself was getting this unloaded out of the truck and into the garage. To be honest, I drug it across the garage. I did not carry it. But for that reason, I decided I was going to use 3/4 inch MDF for the sides, the bottom, and a middle support panel, but I was going to use 1/2 inch MDF for the rest of the cabinet. And if you're curious, I actually still have my original shopping list. And so what I ended up using was 2 4x8 sheets of 3/4 inch MDF, 3 4x8 sheets of 1/2 inch MDF. I had 1 4x8 1/4 inch pegboard that actually made up the back panel that's going to hinge open to allow me access, and 5 8-inch 1x2 furring strips. That was pretty much it for the lumber for the cabinet. So the first thing that I did was I took my design plans and I transferred those over to the MDF. And you'll notice an eraser laying there and some lines that look like they've been erased. Yep, even after I drew this out, all the planning that I had done, once I actually had it on the MDF, I felt like the cabinet still looked too shallow. It wasn't deep enough. So I decided right then and there to go ahead and add 2 inches of depth to the cabinet and redrew all the lines. So once I was happy with the final design, the next challenge was going to be to cut this. Now, again, using just a portable table saw and working by myself, there was no way I was going to be able to use a table saw to cut this. Now, luckily, I had a friend that had told me about these Craig circular saw guides. So I decided that's the way I was going to tackle this. I basically put my 4x8 sheet up on some 2x4s, and using these guides and very carefully taking my time, was able to use the circular saw and get my side cut out. Now, once the first side was done, the second side was a lot easier because I laid that on the next sheet, actually temporarily screwed that down, and was able to use the first as a guide to cut out the second side. Once that was done, I then had my two sides completed. So the next step was to cut the groove onto the front and top edges of these side panels for the T-molding. If you're not familiar with T-molding, it's basically edging, plastic edging or piping that's going to go along and give you a nice finished look along the edges. Again, I used my palm router. It was the only power tool I had to buy for this project, and I had not used one before. But that and a slot bit, and just taking my time, going along and cutting that groove into the front and the top. Obviously, I did not need to cut a groove on the back side or a groove on the bottom because we would not be putting any T-molding there. Next, I used the same technique that I used on the sides to cut my other panels, the 3/4 inch panels for the base and the mid-shelf support, and to cut all of my 1/2 inch panels to the approximate size. I would cut them to exact size later, but I needed to get them small enough that I could get up and use the table saw to cut them to the size and apply any bevels that I might need where angles were meeting on the panels. With that done, then I needed to lay out all of my lines for my furring strips. The panels aren't going to come up flush. There's going to be a lip overhanging on the sides, and as you see here, and that's pretty much what all of the original arcade machines were as well. I decided to have a 3/4 inch lip or overhang on my side panels, so that with the 1/2 inch panels that would make up the front, meaning I needed to draw a line 1 1/4 inches back from the front edge. So I did that all the way around, and that would serve as my guideline for laying down my furring strips. So next I went ahead and cut all of my furring strips, labeled them, and laid them out along the lines I had just drawn. I also opted to go ahead and draw out where the 1/2-inch panels were going to meet. That would help me later, not only in pre-drilling my screw holes, but also help me calculate the angles that I would need using a digital angle finder to measure this bevel when I was going to have to cut those panels on the table saw. With all that done, it came time to actually attach the furring strips to the side panels. This is one of the places where I did use that finish nailer, but again, you could get away with just gluing these in place. This really aren't going to support those panels. They're really there to help you align. You're going to be running screws through those panels that are actually going to attach them. But again, you see here by drawing that line, I also was able to pre-drill my screw holes from the back side. I could flip that over and go ahead and drill my countersink on the front side. Here's just another real quick photo, again showing where I've drawn out the lines for those 1/2-inch panels. And note here I made myself a reminder to not put any screws here. This is going to be that top, very top panel. And remember, I want that hinged so I'll have access to the marquee area. So once all the furring strips were down, I basically just went ahead and pre-drilled the holes for the pinball buttons on the sides. And again, this one hole here is for the master power button. Once all that was done, I was able to actually start cutting what were going to be the front panels and apply the beveled edges to them. Again, since I'd pre-cut these, it was small enough I was able to do that with my portable table saw. So here I've got all the panels cut, everything's ready to go. The last piece, I had to cut the hole in the big front panel that would be for the coin door, and then I really just had to cut my administrative control panel. So I had to pre-cut the holes for those buttons. At this point, I'm ready to put the two halves of the cabinet together. So this is the one step where I did need an extra set of hands. So I had a friend stop by just to help me put these two halves together, because this step was very important to make sure everything was aligned and square. Otherwise, all of my other panels weren't going to fit. So basically, I laid down a wood glue along one edge, put my panels on, had him help me put the other side piece on here, hold it steady while I was going ahead and put a couple of screws to hold this in place. So the bottom panel, the mid panel, one of the tops, and the front. I put those together, gave the glue ample time to dry, put those screws in there, and from that point on, he left and I was able to do the rest on my own. Here are a couple more photos of that initial assembly. Again, you can see where those furring strips come in very handy. It was also really nice having those extra lines drawn for the 1/2-inch panels where I could assure that things were aligned. Once that was done, it was really just a matter of working the way around the cabinet, installing the other panels, going ahead and screwing the one side down as I went. Once I had those in place, I was able to flip the cabinet over and apply all the screws on the other side. The final piece that went in was that administrative control panel. And again, once everything was dried and screwed together, went ahead and put the casters on the bottom and was able to finally stand the cabinet up and see it for the first time. Now, I will note, you'll notice the control panel is also here. I'm going to get to the control panel in another part of this series. This actually is a rough cut. It actually hasn't even been trimmed to length. You'll notice how big of an overhang there is here. But at this point, I would say I'd spent about 4 days, again, taking my time, checking and double checking to get this thing put together. But I was really happy at this point. It really was starting to look like an arcade cabinet and coming together. So that's going to do it for part 2. In part 3, we're going to take a look at the monitor bezel, mounting the monitor, and building out that marquee area, which ended up being a lot trickier than I was expecting. So hopefully this video is giving you some ideas or maybe some confidence in building your own arcade machine. So if you've seen anything that you found helpful or generated any ideas, or you just like this video, do me a favor and hit that like button. That lets both me and YouTube know you'd like to see more videos like this. Hit that subscribe button to see some of my other videos, and if you want to be notified when I release the next video in this series, ding that little bell icon. As always, I would like to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon.